gentlemen, I am OmnusI here in the theater wing of the Lair of OmnusI. Today I thought I'd do a little bit different video. I've got the old PlayStation 3 on YouTube fired up, and I want to present this video to you. It's Hollywood actor Joe Manganiello, who is an outspoken activist for Dungeons & Dragons and generally role-playing. He's a guy who's really personally passionate about the hobby, plays with his Hollywood friends, and seems to have a lot of fun with it, which is great. It seems very genuine about his love for role-playing. So Wired contacted him and asked if he would do basically Dungeons & Dragons version tech support with them. Apparently that's a growing thing for them on Twitter. So he agreed to sit down and answer questions. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to give a little bit different perspective in some cases on his, he has his outlook, I have mine. So in general, I think it would be a good thing to put up and to offer a little extra help with a different perspective than Joe himself gave. He's very knowledgeable, he's very, very good, but no game master has all perspectives at one go. So there aren't always one right answer or one wrong answer. So I'll just offer up a little bit of help where I can, a little bit extra advice. So again, this is taken off of Joe Manganiello Discusses Dungeons & Dragons. So.
Hi, I'm Joe Manganiello, and this is Dungeons & Dragons support. It was impossible. It was like he was going to have to roll a 1 in 100. At disadvantage, he rolls 2 20s, both nat 20s. He rolled double nat 20s at disadvantage, throwing a rock into a hole with magical darkness against this fleeing black dragon. I had to give him the hit. The whole table was screaming, "Oh! Oh!" You know, there's no way he could hit it. He hit it, and he killed that dragon.
So the question was, what is one of the greatest natural 20 moments that you've ever had? Quite honestly, I think the best one I've ever seen, at least the most dynamic, was one I'll call my own number for this. I was playing a bard in a 2nd edition D&D campaign, and the Dungeon Master did not like bards. So I had no very useful spells. He never let me have a fireball, for instance, just very basic magics, the ability to inspire people, and a very third-rank combat contributor. We're fighting a homebrewed race called the Hydrai, which were insectoid-like creatures that had a vulnerability to salt, to the point where we were actually carrying around bags of salt with our characters. We were ambushed by some in our tavern room, and we fought them off. There was one survivor that leapt out the window to escape. And everybody else had already gone. I was the only one left to go because my, well, kind of comically low initiative rolls, as I frequently do. I was the only one left. It was badly wounded and it was going to get away, and if it was going to get away, it was going to cause no end of trouble. So I had my character leap out the window and come down with the sword on it. Natural 20. Killed it 1 hit, even though the odds of me killing it weren't all that good. Managed it with that natural 20, finished it off, prevented the Hydra from attacking in a second wave, which allowed us to recuperate and to eventually triumph in that city. And we went on to have some pretty good adventures off of that. So.
Okay, this is from Silk the Crocker, a.k.a. Crocs fans only. Hey, people who play Dungeons & Dragons out there, what's the best way to start / learn / get into it? Well, I think there's 2 ways you can go. One, you can get 3 books. You need 3 books to play D&D. You need the Player's Handbook, you need the Dungeon Master's Guide, and you need a Monster Manual. From there, it's pretty self-explanatory. Make a character. You're going to get between 50 and 70% of how to play D&D, or at least all the necessary questions you're going to want to ask from creating a character. So crack a Player's Handbook, pick a race, pick a class, pick your background, get your equipment, set your character up. Then from there, somebody's going to need to run the game. So if you're ambitious, you love storytelling the way that I do, you're going to lean into becoming the Dungeon Master rather than a player. Now, Dungeon Masters, you're going to want to read the Dungeon Master's Guide, get acquainted with the Monster Manual, see what monsters in there you like, you don't, you want to throw at your characters, blah, blah, blah. then you're going to want to either homebrew an adventure, which means you write your own, or the other option, I would say that just simplifies things, is to get the starter kit, which is a boxed set, and everything, once again, is self-explanatory, but it's on a smaller scale. That's how you get into it, brother. Oh, the next...
All right, well, and this, I'm going to have to disagree with Joe. The best and easiest way to get into it is find a group that already exists. It's so much easier to learn how to play when you have other people around who can answer all those questions or try to kind of guide you a little bit where, you know, you might have some rough patches. Just jumping into it and buying the books is a little overwhelming for a lot of people. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it. Certainly, that's advice that would work. But before you buy the 3 books at $50 a piece, just bear in mind, there are other games besides Dungeons & Dragons, but if you really want Dungeons & Dragons, it has a higher upfront price tag, and there are other alternatives too. The starter set or the essentials kit are kind of encapsulated. They have everything for a person to start out. It is an entry point, not the final product. So if you really get into those and you really want to keep going in Dungeons & Dragons, yes, the 3 core books, the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual are pretty much essentials for Dungeons & Dragons. Another thing, too, and where I again somewhat disagree with him, is that, you know, it's the idea of just home brewing it or the starter kit. A lot of the adventure paths that they've come up with are pretty good at guiding a person into running a game. If you've absorbed the material from the Dungeon Master's Guide and plug that into what the adventure path gives you, the adventure path is a little bit better in general than the starting handbook at a big picture approach. The starter set is really good for showing you how to get those first steps, but after that, understanding how to weave an entire campaign or a series of stories together, those adventure paths are pretty darn good. And I would honestly recommend the Princes of the Apocalypse is one of the easier ones to start with, because everything starts slow and simple and goes along and ramps up as you go. So those would be my bits of advice. Definitely try to look out for people who've played before as the people that you can look to learn with and from. And if that doesn't work, yes, there are people who play online. They can't answer your questions directly often, but they often have communities that can do much the same. Just bear in mind, every game master has their own style. Don't think just because this one person you saw online plays this way and runs the game this way that everybody does that. So, you know, your mileage may vary. Now, as far as dungeon masters go, yes, the starter set is a great way to start because it has a lot of tips and hints for the starting dungeon master on how to run things. Creating your own story is challenging, depending on how detailed you want to be, but it can be ultimately the most rewarding, where everything that happens is because you came up with it, which is really cool. And certainly one of the reasons why people like me have been in this hobby for so long. So, back to you, Joe.
Question is from my buddy Sam Whitwer. Dungeons and Dragons question, what's a more dangerous character to have in your party? Lawful evil or chaotic evil? It's a great question, Sam, and one that I feel like I am uniquely qualified to answer. I would say the better thing for the party would be a lawful evil character, because at least there are rules, there are collective goals that can be adhered to. You might have a, dragonborn worshiper of Tiamat in your group, who plays really well with the group, and there's a collective goal. But there's also, because of the lawful evil, there's a kind of a long play goal. There's a goal outside of the group that this dragonborn paladin of Tiamat would be also attempting to achieve. But they can play nice within a group. It's kind of like when Magneto came to take over the X-Men after Charles Xavier died, and they could see eye to eye in a common goal. But you gotta watch out once you start achieving that goal, because that lawful evil character might flip. Chaotic evil, on the other hand, chaotic just doesn't play nice. I've been in groups with chaotic players, I've dungeon mastered for groups of chaotic players. It's like I'm a gremlin in your group that's just gonna throw a monkey wrench everywhere you go. So I think that would be a lot more frustrating. You'd want to kill him or throw him out.
Okay. Well, Joe's a little biased here. His main character is Lawful Evil, Paladin of Tiamat. So, I mean, to a certain extent, he has his reasons. But Quite honestly, I think my take on that is the answer is it depends as long as the player understands the conventions of the game. Lawful evil or chaotic evil, doesn't matter. If you're working against the group, you're not being a good player. At least in games where the understanding is that the group is cooperating together. Dungeons & Dragons generally assumes this, because goodness knows the rest of the world is bad enough without having to worry about your own party members. If you have somebody who is playing chaotic evil and they just do things lol random, your group is in a great position to just say, okay, you're done, goodbye, we're leaving you at the next town. We don't want to associate with you. And again, that also kind of breaks a convention, but that other person did it first. No player has the right to ruin the fun of the rest of the group. And if they do it because they are not playing as a member of the group, no matter what their alignment isn't an excuse. Even chaotic evil people crave friendship. They may not value it to the point where they'll risk their lives for it, but they want friends. They still have the same needs and urges everybody else has. So it just means that chaotic means they don't stick to their word and they believe in a certain randomness to things. And evil means they don't value life as much, if at all. So you have a person who basically doesn't have a lot of connections. That doesn't mean they don't value friendship. That doesn't mean they don't have goals that they will strive for. And sometimes, hey, if it's these other people who follow me around and heal me and watch my back, I'm not going to sell them, under the bus. I'm just going to work with them as long as I can. And if I do have some other sort of goals, I'm not going to let it impact them. I'll spare them. Lawful evil, on the other hand, believes in a hierarchy, and they generally believe in keeping their word and having some sort of internal rules and law. It's not always the law of the land that is important, but to them, they have some structure, and that may be easier to deal with. On the other hand, some lawful evil characters want to dominate everything. They want to be the one who calls all the shots, and that can be even more trying than a chaotic character. So it really depends on the player and their interpretation, or how their character interprets their alignment. Alignment is not a hard and fast. It is a description of how a character's outlook is, so that it kind of brings a sense of overall hegemony to the actions of the character. It helps you to guide your role play. It's not necessarily a prison. Even a lawful good person can be pushed to the point where they will break a law or they will kill. Depends on the circumstances. The same way, a lawful evil person will generally be counted on to hold their word and to obey whatever laws they hold valuable. But doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to be working against the party or having their own agenda. Sometimes it just means that's their outlook. Now, if they're driven like a paladin of Tiamat to serve their god, then that's going to include a lot of other things, but that's not necessarily the question of alignment. The answer is, what's the most dangerous? It's the player who doesn't play well with others, just like anything. And that can be lawful good as well. A paladin used to be kind of, they were notorious because some people played paladins like they were uncompromising taskmasters, demanding the alignments of everybody else and things like that, or turning in their own party members when they did things they thought were dishonorable, to the point where a lot of people really kind of had problems with paladins. And that really was only just a way to play and not necessarily the best. So, again, it really depends on the player and their interpretation. If I had my choice, I'd take a loyal, to me at least, a chaotic evil person over a lawful evil person that I don't know. Just because, you may not value life tremendously. You may not always hold to your word, but if I know that you're going to have my back when we get into it, even if you're going to make sure that you don't die, but if you have my back when I can count on it, you're in for me. So, onwards.
There. All right, this is from Turk Owl. Dungeons & Dragons question. Do rogues get to attack twice per action if they have daggers in both hands? Kind of lost on this logistic. All right, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I can see how that would be confusing. There's a fighting style where you can have a second attack, and there is a feat in which you get to add your damage bonus to attacks or offhand attacks. So, you either need the fighting ability or you need a feat that allows you to strike with two hands. We're talking daggers here, so we're talking about a small weapon rather than a large weapon, which gets into a whole other thing, because there are feats for fighters in which they can carry heavy weapons in both hands. This is from...
Okay, Joe's a little off base on this one, and I don't blame him. This may be something that doesn't come up very often, but the actual mechanical answer to that is a rogue using a weapon in each hand, say 2 daggers, can attack with both of them. However, not in the same action. Your action determines basically how many attacks you can get. For most characters, that's a single attack. Other characters eventually get a multi-attack, which allows them to use their one action to take several attacks. This would be your fighter, barbarians, paladins. Fighters can eventually get 3 or even 4 attacks for that basic action. Now, rogues are in that category where, for most of them, unless you take the right path, you only get your 1 attack. However, all characters can have a secondary light weapon, if their first weapon is light, and they can make a bonus action attack with the offhanded weapon. It's not a disadvantage or anything, but it does not add their modifier for their attribute to the attack. So with a dagger, you can't use your strength or your dexterity modifier unless they're negative. Unless you have a negative strength, you won't get that. You could also throw that weapon as your bonus action if you wanted to. So anybody can do that. Now, if you are a fighter with the 2-weapon fighting style, that means that you do add your ability modifier to your weapon damage with the offhand attack. And if you take the dual weapon fighter feat, which anybody can take, not just fighters, you can add +1 to your armor class when you have a weapon in each hand. Kind of explains how fencers would use a main gauche to attempt to parry and make themselves a harder target. It also allows you to use a bigger weapon than just light weapons with the 2 hands. So if you really want to wield longswords, you could dual wield longswords with this style. And it also allows you to draw 2 weapons instead of 1 using that action. So if you're really going to commit to that style, it's not terrible to go that way. If you're always going to have a weapon in each hand, any bonus to your armor class is a good one. But again, this is something that confuses a lot of people. Remember, the action is a single attack. If you are attacking using your action, unless you have multi-attack, anybody can use their bonus action for that second weapon if you have a light weapon in your offhand. So that's the actual rules. Again, he doesn't have a player's handbook in front of him. It looks like he's taking these off the cuff, so I don't fault him with this one.
This is from @optional_rule. I break his knees, in quotations. Many a D&D or tabletop role-playing game master looks on in horror as the players torture someone who doesn't do what they want. How do you handle this in your games? Do you overlook it, penalize them, encourage them? Hey, I'm just the referee. I just set up the world. I'm just the voyeur. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm also the architect of the long-form story. So I'm the one who's setting the tracks down. You can gently nudge people into storylines that you think are going to be really interesting, but inevitably it's up to them because they may decide to go the other way. So you need to be ready for that. And with that said, the beauty of role-playing is that you can do whatever you want. If they want to kill and torture the shopkeeper, they can do that. They can do whatever they want. So they're going to start with the shopkeeper, but then they're going to take out the sheriff and his deputy when they get there, and then they're going to take over this town and hold them hostage. I always get excited whatever the players do, because I'm just going to go with it. You know, my players sometimes come across hill giants in the wild, and a fight breaks out, and they kill all the hill giants. And then when they go and they search the bodies of the hill giants, I'll say, yes, it's interesting. You hear something making a noise in the pocket of the hill giant's vest. You look inside of the vest pouch, and it's like a little bone rattle that looks like it would fit into the hand of a baby hill giant. Oh, and what's this? It's a taxidermied fox that's been stuffed like a child's toy. Somewhere off in the distance, you swear you hear the faint sound of a baby crying. You know, so it's like you just wiped out a whole village of hill giants, and you think, yeah, we did it, and now I'm going to make you feel bad because you left all these like orphaned hill giant babies out there screaming in the night. So it's like I always try to make my players feel bad about wiping things out because there's so much just head chopping off and lighting people on fire in D&D that a lot of times the humanitarian angle never gets covered. You know, but that's kind of the sense of humor that I have with my players. You know, like I said, man, it's just have fun with it. Let it go. It's not up to you, it's up to them. And then you just start guiding it where you want it to go because, yeah, ultimately as the referee, you can be as hard on them as you want or not, depending on how you feel or, you know, whatever.
Okay, that is certainly a topic, and that comes to the head chopping of the shopkeeper. Players can do what they want in a role-playing game. You can get this very liberated feeling that, hey, it's a world that I can do anything. And honestly, with the statistics as they are, and mechanics as they are, you can discover the results of just about anything, so it can lead people to want to try almost anything. To the point where the murder hobo, a person who just uses killings and violence to solve any problem, can become a problem with some players. If you're a game master who doesn't care about the world and it's just for fun, it's just for giggles, that's fine. You ultimately are the one who controls the world and how it reacts to the players. But if you have a realistic world, let's face it, a world in a fantasy setting has to deal with powerful adventurers all the time, some of them committed to evil and committing evil acts. The world has to have some mechanism in it to make sense on how that is dealt with. Now, oftentimes, the common folk can't deal with adventurers. They're too powerful, but there's got to be some law that can come down on players who do things like that. Actions can have consequences. And if your actions have consequences, your players may learn that, hey, cutting the head off the shopkeeper because I want to rob his store or because I didn't get the price I wanted or what have you, has consequences. You will be found. There's magic that can find you out. The law will probably have access to that. The law has armies and hit mages. And if you are a real rabid wild dog going out and just violencing anybody you want, even the people who are legitimate criminals may want to take you down. So all of a sudden now you have Thieves Guild assassins coming after you and so on and so forth. So you can just sit back and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. And they can get away with it scot-free. It's your game. There's no right or wrong on that. In my game, though, those actions have very serious consequences. Committing murder is against the law in any civilized society. Just walking up and killing somebody out of hand has to be punishable, or you have anarchy. And very few of my worlds have a sustained state of anarchy in any given area. Even the most primitive tribals have very real consequences for killing somebody, usually meaning an eye for an eye, meaning you die too in many societies. Otherwise, forced labor, prison. Enough so that your character, your cool player character, can be arrested or killed by the guard, the army, whoever is called on to take you in, and you can be out of the campaign. Or you can inspire the story to have the rest of the characters try to heroically save your character if you're worth it. So, yeah, you can just sit back and every once in a while players will do something like that. Again, if they bought into your world, that's probably not as much of a concern if they understand that your world is, or it has the underpinnings of a real society to it, and that they can't just go and do whatever they want without suffering the consequences of the law or what have you. Now, the guilt trip approach works pretty well for some people. I know plenty of people who just roll their eyes and say, okay, well, we got to kill the hill giant babies too. There's a whole morality structure in place there about, going into a dungeon, slaughtering an entire tribe of orcs, and what do we do with the women and children? Paladin draws out his sword and says, well, we can't leave anybody alive. They'll just eventually grow up and be just as much of a threat to humanity as anything. And the women can have more babies, which we don't want, so we're just going to go in. And other people are like, you can't kill women and children. That's wrong. There's an argument and discussion that you can have with that. This isn't the place. But yeah, as far as players doing atrocities, yeah, sometimes that might happen, and it's up to you if there's consequences. I ran a campaign for shady characters in Shadowrun one time, and quite literally, although we often joke about it, they literally cut off a person's leg and beat him with it to interrogate him. And he lived, amazingly, but, you know, and I just saw all this, and we were all just at the same time, we're going, oh my gosh, how far can you go with this? But they were playing dark characters, and in Shadowrun, life is relatively cheap, and he could get a cyber limb, so, and I think he ended up doing that. I don't think they killed him. But, yeah, these are things that you can do. No, wait, I think he died. Doesn't matter. These are things that you can do, and games can liberate you to explore those kind of dark places if you want to. But if you don't, just make your world have real consequences, and it stops the murderer hoboing pretty quickly. The other thing to get around that, too, make your players care. If your players care about their characters and the things their characters care about, they're going to be a lot less likely to be random. Give them bonds. Give them things that tie them down to the world. Give them things that they care about and cherish. And if their characters care about those things and the players trample all over that, you can tell the players, hey, you know, you understand that your character does have this bond that, you know, they find value in this and wouldn't be so likely to do it, at the very least. Still can't stop the players from doing it if they want to, but if you have good role players, then those are the kind of things that you can set forward. And a lot of times those bonds are formed in a good session 0 at the beginning of a game to set those things in motion so the players understand what their characters think and feel. So, all right, Joe, let's keep going.
Parabasis. Next Dungeons & Dragons question. What was your favorite character class and race? Growing up, I was big into elves because elves had a little bit of magic and a little bit of fighting, and I really liked that. 2E, Dragonlance, I was a Minotaur. The second you could be a Minotaur, I was a Minotaur, of course. And now when I say elf, I'm not trying to get out of answering what's my favorite class. Back in the day, elf was race and class. You were an elf, which means you had both, which was kind of interesting. I love playing a warlock. I'm playing a warlock right now in a Mad Mage, Dungeon of the Mad Mage campaign, and man, there's just so many tricks up their sleeves. So for me, I love playing characters that have tons of options. Like I have a high-level sorcerer that I love playing because along with the meta magic, and then you really have tons of options, you know, and ways to get out of situations or ways to be creative or ways to participate in the storytelling. You know, if you twin polymorph T-Rexes inside of a tavern, doesn't matter what the Dungeon Master had planned, you're in charge now of the story, you know, you just caused this to happen. So I really like being able to really affect the story, and I find that those spellcasters, there's a lot of wow factor.
All right, I love wizards. I do, for much of the same reason that Joe does. With your magic, you can do an incredible amount outside of a dungeon, outside of a combat scenario. Magic gives you the ultimate X factor in accomplishing your goals and allowing you to do cool and crazy things. In combat, a wizard who is played by a deft player can completely change the complexion of a battle with a single well-placed spell, or absolutely devastate an enemy that could cause problems to the players, or protect the other player characters from the hostile magic of a foe. Wizards, to me, have the best toolbox in the game, although they had, of course, disadvantages, low hit points and no armor class and so on and so forth, but that was part of the challenge of it, which I really enjoyed. What he said about elves is true. Elves could fight and use magic in basic Dungeons and Dragons, but it took forever to go up levels. You really had to commit and be in long games for that. I guess ultimately my answer to that question, though, is what's my favorite class? Whatever I'm playing now. Because honestly, I don't get to play that often. So I have to love the character that I've got, and there's not a single one that I have that I really don't want to play. Even if I have my preference, even if I have both my Barbarian, Galhard, and I have my Wizard, Corbrecht, I will play Corbrecht more often. I will play my Wizard. But there is something about the unchained joy of combat that you get from a Barbarian, too. So, and I know how to play Barbarians and Fighters in a fun, dynamic way. So, yeah, that's my answer to this question. Carrying on.
Okay, this is from JLJ-H. F. Leger, aka Geekbot. Question is it weird that I practice character voices in front of the bathroom mirror? No, I don't think that's weird. I don't do a character voice too much when I'm a player, unless I'm like delivering some opus or some charisma check. But when I dungeon master, it's just voices all over the place. All my NPCs have voices, whether they're, sweet little lady who works down at the apothecary. Her name's Tony. What yins want? What can I get yins? That's basically the Pittsburgh dialect where I grew up. So, and then my brother will start laughing. People who've been in Pittsburgh will start laughing. People even who haven't been in Pittsburgh start laughing because it's such a rich character, and it's based on somebody who works at a sandwich shop back home. And then they become a character, and then you should go over and see my nephew Donnie in that. He's a blacksmith. And then they go and visit Donnie. He talks the same way. Or like, all of the animal familiars, or, the druids speaking to animals. Then there's all of those voices, of all of the Christmas animals in South Park. If they talk to a squirrel, the squirrel talks like that. Of course. And then they want to talk to the horse, and the horse, they went that way. Or they talk to a seagull, but the seagull wasn't impressed at all with what they were doing. He was amazed. Any of them wound up alive, how sloppy they were. And they asked the seagull, what's your name? You can call me Christopher Squawkin'. I think you should take it a step further and film yourself doing the character voices. That way you can critique your performance. I don't know, maybe there's some sort of career for you here. You're going to become an actor or something. But no, man, I totally do all of that. I always develop voices or I figure a voice out and then make a note to myself. Somewhere down the line, I need a character that's going to talk like Ted Knight in Caddyshack, and then when they get to the councils, oh, hello, yes, that's usually how my DMing goes as well, so I identify. I just pivot from voices, but you can see that it's endless. I'm always making notes of this voice or that voice, and, and popping those characters up along the way.
Great advice. I can't add to that. Both doing it and observing yourself, and your players take so many cues off of voice and facial features. It's sometimes hard for me to fathom, playing remotely and losing a little bit of that. I love using all of those things to communicate with my players. And it's very rewarding to have a successful voice for an NPC, but I'm a little surprised that he doesn't get more into character voice, because I find that having a separate character voice than your own helps communicate to everybody else when you're talking in character as opposed to when you're not. My last character, Corbrecht, for instance, he talked like a dwarf. Whenever I talked, I had the bad Scottish accent, and I'm coming to thump you upside of the head, and that's who I would talk. And just then they would know that's me talking. And it did dampen a little bit because nobody else reciprocated, nobody else has a voice or anything, so it was just me and that's kind of unfortunate. That's where you really gel best with people who have kind of similar play styles and things. And I think that's also why those shows like Critical Role, where all these people are voice actors or are used to acting in some way, shape, or form, really took off, because you could identify with those characters better when they had their own unique voice and you were hearing things in the character's voice, not the actor necessarily. So I think that's a very big thing, and I think practicing is essential. Just like anything, you get good at it the more you do it. My Scottish Dwarven accent, stereotype, but it works, got much better as I was going through the campaign. I was able to slip into it much easier, and I was able to draw out things that I hadn't thought of beforehand. It just kind of slipped out, and everybody seemed to think it was pretty fine. So, yeah, it is something that great game masters do, and it's a great tool to have in your toolbox. Very good, Jeff. He would probably be a hoot to play under if he could do all those characters and everything, and yeah, I think he would be a lot of fun. Seraguchi_arts. What would be a fearsome and evil name for a black dragon? And what kind of a gem would you give him? Ooh, good question. So I actually just answered this question. So I designed a quest book for
the relaunch of HeroQuest. I named the Black Dragon Venom, Venim, which I like. She should take that. And I would think, I don't know, for a gem, I would give the Black Dragon a giant amethyst. Some gigantic, huge, massive amethyst that had some sort of, like, even in darkness, had some sort of, like, magical ability to create light from the inside, almost like a pulsing, but it's just the way that the light shifts and hits it. But even in the dark, you can see the light sparkling inside somehow. It's got its own kind of thing going on. Anyway, there you go.
All right, first of all, it's kind of interesting because the Pulse campaign for HeroQuest did not get to the point where the Joe Manganiello adventure would be published. So either he did that and they're not going to use it, or they're still going to launch it, which would make me happy. I find Venom to be kind of I'm not fond of the name because, first of all, black dragons are acidic, not poisonous. And Venom sounds like a bad name from an 80s rock band, like a garage band that didn't go anywhere. But dragons are smart, generally. And most of them have polysyllabic names. Black dragons are kind of edgy, so I would give it a name like Asterzalix, with a couple of X's in there. Z, Asterzalix. Yeah, that's a good black dragon name. I find dragons to be easy because their names are often pretentious, either because their parents think that they're going to be awesome because they're dragons, or because they want to feel awesome about themselves, so they give themselves fancy names. Either way, it works. As far as the gem, his idea is really cool. I like the idea of the gem being a large piece of onyx, which itself is not incredibly precious, but this one actually contains a shard of the grandsire of this dragon, the soul of its grandsire, and that by possessing it, occasionally by reaching out and touching it, you can get whispers in the voice of this ancient, long-dead dragon, and it can tell them things about, give them basically advantage on tests against history or arcana, because that great-grandsire dragon actually, for a black dragon, it's not common that they use magic as much. He actually was kind of an accomplished spellcaster among dragons. So, there you go, right off the cuff. I can do this too. No, it was a good answer.
This is from One Crit Wonder. What is your favorite D&D campaign setting and why? I love Dragonlits. I just do. I like Kryn. I like that there are books that are companions that give you a fully fleshed out view of the world, because I find that with some of the other worlds, it's very hard to get the canon straight, and it's very hard to understand, pantheons and gods, and I mean, it just seems like there's so much catch-up work, and there are all answers to these questions, but it's like so hard to find them, and there's different answers to different questions. Anyway, with Kryn, if you don't include the Fifth Age stuff that was done without Margaret and Tracy, if you only look at the Margaret and Tracy canon, or at least, the books that they, okayed, you get this really beautiful, amazing, deep world that involves all the things about fantasy that I like, which is, fighting and friendship and family and romance and love. My gosh, it just seems like they're trying to eradicate romance from D&D and tabletop, and so I really love Dragonlance for that reason. It's very human, and you understand the gods, you understand what's at stake, and there are great NPCs and villains and things, and my favorite characters in all of D&D canon. So I like Dragonlance. I like Kryn. Recently, I've gotten into collecting all the old Dark Sun modules and box sets. So those are starting to pile up. So maybe over the holidays, I'll be able to dive into those.
I always found Dragonlance to be a little trite. It's kind of your generic fantasy setting, really. So all in all, I thought that Dragonlance Adventures was one of the seminal books that you needed for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of good resources and information in that, including anything you need to know about the Tinker Gnomes or the Kender. But what I really loved myself was Planescape. The idea that yeah, all these books touch upon that all these outer planes exist, and it kind of gives a framework for where the gods are and such. I love the idea of being able to go out there into alternate realities. To me, that's ultimate fantasy right there. If you could have, you know, dinner in Mechanus, and you know your tip is already predetermined because that is the way the universe works, and your food is exactly going to be exactly like the last person had that dish. It's always that way because that's how Mechanus works. And then you spin off and you decide you want to go off to the lower level of Mount Celestia, and you know you go for a shopping trip. You know that generally you're not going to get cheated by the shopkeepers and stuff because they're inherently good people who value law, and you know you're not going to haggle too often, but you know you're going to maybe get some divine things that'll help you for a bit of a raid that you've got going in Baator. So I loved that universe. A lot of the heavy-handed stuff about alignments and the different schools of thought, the philosophy, yeah, I binned most of that. It didn't really work all that great for me. And they basically just kind of served as a backdrop. Philosophical schools as a backdrop more so than the driving force of the universe. But I did love the universe. I loved Sigil, and I'm glad that they continue on with it. But as far as, you know, the cast of characters, Dragonlance was amazing. Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman's creation, fantastic. It lost me on the Fifth Age, just like it did Joe. But I loved the classics. I loved them. Actually, one of my high points in a convention was getting my Dragons in Spring Morning, I think it was, autographed. It was a first edition run, autographed by Tracy and Margaret. It was great. They're great people. We're great to talk to. I do love the world. It's just not been my favorite because I feel more comfortable in Greyhawk if I'm going to do pure fantasy. And I've always been in love with Planescape since I first started reading it. So even if it has some of the art that I like the least with some of D. Terlizzi's stuff, but yeah, that'd be my answer.
Okay, this is from Matt Holmes, aka Tabletop Painting. If your PC's philosophy differs from the rest of the group, do you roll up a new one, conform to the group, or see how much you can get away with behind their backs? You're trying to make me an accomplice or somehow justify you destroying your party. Play nice, young man. Don't be a menace to your own group, you know, or something where like somebody's going to want to punch you on the way up the stairs. Because I've had players that try to split the party and that becomes their thing. I'm going to go explore, and some character dies. And people get pissed, and they have words with each other about it. So, you know, it's a team game. Play nice with other kids in the sandbox. But with that said, like, don't let that get in the way of a great character.
This one depends on the game that you're playing, of course. Sometimes you can have games that are a little bit more confrontational. But everybody has to understand that it is a game. So, that being said, it's fine with having rules where you can't play evil or you can't play people who, you know, work against the rest of the group. It's a convention, honestly. You know, you might say it's just what my character would do, but you're breaking the game rules, the convention, the unspoken rules, which oftentimes are just as important, if not more so, than the written rules that you're following for the game. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't pay. I remember in a game of Exalted, I was playing the ultimate paladin, the guy who I will throw myself at danger and I will try to make everybody's life better, and the rest of my party was either disinterested or actively evil. So I eventually said, I'm going to let this character walk off. He's not going to want to associate with these guys anymore, and he will go off and do his own things, and I'll make another character. And he was a hedonistic rock star in Exalted. And the campaign kind of broke up after that because we didn't have any direction anymore. But all the same, I realized that me wanting to play my character was working against what everybody else was doing, and I realized that I kind of was a problem with that group's dynamics. So yeah, sometimes it's okay to conform. It's just you have to rework things in a way that works with your dynamic for your group, and that's going to vary from person to person, quite honestly. So yeah, don't do things that are going to break up your group or directly antagonize different members of the group. There's just accidents will happen enough that may cost characters their lives. You don't need to be the instigator of that and make everybody else feel like you're playing against them. So,
This is from Edward R. Curtis, aka Dimly_Lit. It's very gothic. Odd Dungeons and Dragons question. Typically, when making your player character, do you come up with the character first, then the race, class, stuff, or the other way around? Choosing the race, class, stuff, then making a character around that. Interesting question. I think it differs. I think it just differs from character to character. When I was a kid, we didn't have Dragonborns. Those came around in 4th edition, and I wasn't playing. I was on a D&D hiatus doing like 3rd and 4th edition, so when I met back up with 5th edition and I saw that you could play as a Dragonborn, and then I saw that they were chromatic, I thought, oh man, that's like playing a low-level, or aspiring Dragon High Lord or someone in the Dragon Army in Dragonlits, in the Dragonlance books. And I just thought, man, that is like super cool. We didn't have, like I said, we didn't have that when I was a kid. So I naturally gravitated towards picking a red Dragonborn first. I like Paladins. I thought Paladin was a really cool class growing up, and a little bit of magic, lots of fighting. Then I saw that there was a possibility of playing an Oathbreaker if your dungeon master allowed it. So that's how I built that character, Archon. Yeah, and then other times it's like, I already know what the character is. He's going to be a little halfling who has all black leather and a gimp mask, and he walks around and talks like this, and and he's a wild sorcerer because every time he shoots magic, he doesn't know what's going to happen, and so all of a sudden now I have this little like German S&M halfling wild sorcerer that I just cooked up in my brain, and all right, I'll make that character and play him.
Okay. First of all, I think for some people, race feeds a lot more into the character than others. Some people just look at your race as a way of getting certain stats and abilities that you're looking for. And for those people, that can come afterwards just to work on the build. Making a barbarian, I'm going to make him a half-orc. If I'm going to be making an archer ranger, yeah, I'll make him an elf. It just kind of comes as a secondary thought. For other people, the mindset of a particular race that they're inclined to may be the motivating factor for you. Like he said, he thinks that a red dragonborn would have this strong inclination to being a paladin and giving his allegiance to someone like Tiamat. Yeah, that's a very dynamic character, and that's perfectly valid. Realistically, I think that race has a lot more to do, and I'm getting to dislike the term race. I'd rather call them the peoples that they've come from. But their people give them a lot more of the character than we're generally inclined to think from people who just look at them as a source of statistics. Dwarves, unless they have an aberrant upbringing, have a certain outlook that is programmed into them from decades of living in this culture. And if I'm thinking I'm going to play a dwarf, the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, how is his approach going to be different? He's a wizard. How is his approach going to be different? He's going to be very methodical. He will practice every cantrip over 1,000 times until it's instinctive, just perfect every time. He is a perfect spellcaster that way. When he learns a new spell, he will cast it again and again and again, much like a smith keeps practicing a single stroke 1,000 times before they can claim that they've mastered a single stroke and then maybe a different stroke. That's how dwarves are. And that approach changes the way that I looked at that character. So, either one is valid, he's right, but I think you really should have a good idea of what that race is going to bring to the character besides just some statistics if you're going to be doing the entirety of the character justice. And if you're playing in a game where that doesn't matter as much, then that's fine too. It's how you want to play in your play style.
Okay, the next one is from the Danward Spiral. If that's a Nine Inch Nails reference, then that's awesome. Currently making some homebrew races for my own D&D setting. Any abstract ideas? Weird is good. I don't know, man. I always thought about, like, a civilization of dark gnomes. I have all kinds of other ideas that I use, in my game and float around. I mean, I'll give you one. I wanted something between dragon and draconian, because I have the 5th edition draconian stats. Don't tell anyone. So I wanted something in the middle there, kind of like a tank that could move in. And so I created these abominations and created a storyline of how they were being created. And then I just statted them up and, throw them at my players.
Part of the soul of making a world your own is coming up with your own unique wrinkles on things, and quite honestly, just using other stats of things that are already in existence to guide you is a great way of coming up with things. Also, we could talk about reskinning, where you have an idea from something, and so you're just going to take, like for example, if I want a Tarrasque and I want my players to deal with a Tarrasque at first level, I can take the Tarrasque and I can give them the stats of a Goblin. And people might go, wow, he's got an amazingly light punch for this huge Tarrasque. And it's like, well, it's not really the Tarrasque. It's a Tarrasque, small t, and you know, you're getting a little one. I mean, yeah, he's still 40 feet long, but, you know, he's not quite as fearsome. You may be scared, but, you know, he turns out he's just more playful than anything. And that's valid, although that's kind of a misleading example. But things like that are honestly the soul of making the game your own. Even in the course of an adventure path, tweaking things to fit your own particular world or to fit your world view can really take something that is somewhat formulaic and make it interesting and unique, and showing off a part of your personality and your playstyle, quite honestly. So.
Okay, next question is from Yum DM. When a character dies and the player makes up a new character, what level do you start them at? In older versions of D&D, first edition, second edition, basic, you had characters in a party that were all different levels, because the game was really centered upon getting your character at the highest level it could possibly go, getting your character the best magical items, the most gold, etc. You had players in the party. You could have a 9th level player with a 1st level player with a 2nd level player, whereas in 5th edition it is more centered around the collective story that you're telling. All the characters in the group go up at once. You don't have characters going up on different levels generally. So, you know, when a character dies, jumps back in, and you might play it differently, but all my characters are all at the same level. They all move from 4th to 5th level together, from 5th level to 6th level together, so it's easy. You just jump them back in at that level. But it's DM's choice. A Dungeon Master can do anything. If you think it's better storytelling-wise to start somebody off at level 1 while the rest of the group is advanced, like, go for it. Like, that's totally fine.
Yeah, everything he said is right. Death was seen as a punishment for either bad play or bad luck back in the day, but the characters were created so quickly and easily, often taking about 10 minutes if you had a prepared character sheet, that death didn't have a huge amount of consequence, and you didn't have so much riding on that character's life and story. 5th edition, that's changed quite a bit. That's why there's so many different avenues of almost dying. You know, death saves can make it a little harder for your character to shuffle off the mortal coil. And there are spells like Revivify and Raise Dead and Resurrection and stuff that, again, make it so that your character doesn't really feel the sting of death as much. But starting at a different level in most adventure paths, even though your character will shoot up levels, if you start off at 1st, everyone else is 8th or 9th, and you get an experience share that is appropriate for a challenge at 8th or 9th, you're going to jump up 2, 3, maybe 4 levels really quickly. Especially until you hit that plateau at about 4th. But you're going to feel like you're a henchman. You're going to feel like you're that hireling that they drag along, who hopefully one day will be able to contribute, but will not be up near our tier for the rest of the campaign. And that can be dispiriting. 5th edition isn't more about everybody doing cool things equally. So I would generally err on the side the same way that Joe does, give everybody the same level. I also favor milestone advancement, where you get a level based on accomplishing a particular goal that advances the story forward, rather than tracking individual experience. There's this old school side of me that kind of cringes at that, but honestly, it kind of fits my gaming philosophy these days, so I'm not apologetic for it. So, yeah.
Okay, this is from @Trash Mob Minis. Maybe a dumb question. There's no dumb questions, but I'm a dumb DM. Okay? How do I get the players to form bonds between their characters? Is this a chemistry that happens at its own pace, or is there something I can do to catalyze connections? Good question. There's always a narrative story element that can tie characters together, whether they came from the same place or they start having the same dreams. and start relating that to each other that somehow are tied. They might have been somewhere at the same time, but you can text them both separately in between sessions and let them know that there's this part of their backstory, there's this part of their backstory. But the other thing is like, yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to happen. You know, I had a character who was a bear barbarian, and it was just used to taking all the punishing damage and soaking that up. But there was a cleric in the group, and the cleric, this guy was amazing. He would keep, it's my friend Jason Lyles, he would keep track of what everyone's hit points were, everyone in the group. And he was like the greatest cleric I've ever played with. And he knew how many hit points I had as the barbarian, and his job, he would keep feeding me healing. So my character's job was to soak up all the damage and make sure everybody attacked him. And it was this really great symbiotic relationship that we formed that then became like the storyline where, on a role-playing sense, my barbarian character had done a lot of things that he regretted. And here was this like holy, pious character who believed in this god and believed that the god could save my character's soul. There became this storyline born out of the characters, out of the both of them, where they kind of needed each other and fed off of each other. You know, it's really cool when that stuff happens. So, you know, but there's only so much of it that you can force upon your players.
That's a great story. Honestly, though, a lot of it is your session 0 and backstories, and as a game master, how much you want to tie those things together. You can have familial relationships between player characters too that can help to set things in motion in the beginning. But I think the session 0 is probably the most useful tool to kickstart those initial bonds and things. Then after that, it's up to the game master to make the world kind of draw the players together. If the outside threats are serious enough that the players have to stick together for mutual survival, they will. And they'll find ways to survive by relying on each other, knowing what they can count on from the others, and valuing that, putting a high value on the lives of the other player characters and maintaining those relationships. If the world is kind of blasé and there's not a lot of impetus for them to do one thing or another, then they'll be more independent and generally not value each other quite as much. But that's also why it will be so discordant if you have a player who does not get along with the group, who is, you know, trying to screw with the group, as in that bad Caddick evil example we talked about. That makes it very hard to have those kind of bonds, and it would be only sensible in the storyline that that discordancy is cut out before the group really suffers a downward spiral because of it. So, but yeah, his advice is spot on there. I agree completely, and that's a great story.
At Oregon rolled a 20. What is your best D&D memory? Probably comes from a couple of years ago, right around the holidays, close to my birthday. My wife, there was this big box next to the front door, and she told me to go bring the box into the kitchen, and I did, and I opened it, and unbeknownst to me, Sophia had someone within D&D connect her to Jeff Easley, who painted all the cover paintings for the old Player's Handbooks and Dungeon Master's Guides and Adventure modules. He's one of the Four Horsemen, just, you know, one of the great fantasy painters of all time. And she got in contact with him and had him paint my Archon the Cruel, my Dragonborn Oathbreaker Paladin of Tiamat. She surprised me with this original Jeff Easley painting of Archon in front of Tiamat, like it was the cover of one of those old books. But, you know, to be honest, like there's a great D&D memory every week in our games. You know, that's kind of the beauty of it. Something unexpected happens every week.
Most of my greatest memories are of my friends and I just doing cool things. Almost none of it is on stuff that I've ever gotten. I mean, when I first met Gary Gygax at Gen Con, I don't remember which one, but that was a cool, great memory. I was able to thank him for making the game that I loved. I have an Easley print. He's amazing. The guy is cool, and his art is absolutely stunning. Getting a custom, you know, portrait of your character by somebody of his caliber would be amazing. He's right up there with Larry Elmore and the fine artists that really brought D&D up into everybody's, you know, vision. But most of my memories that I really treasure are when everything works great, everything makes just clicks, And that's not always going to happen. The first time I ran a game in my hobby shop for 12 kids who wanted to play D&D so bad that they would come to this game not knowing who the DM was, and their parents brought them, and they were so excited to play. They jumped into the characters, and we had a great time. And when they were leaving, parents were carrying books up to the front because they knew their kids loved this and they wanted more. That was a great memory that I'll cherish for a very long time. And that'll serve on top of countless great memories. But I always get the special thrill seeing people come into the hobby and being fed at the table with something that they'll cherish for the rest of their lives, possibly. So that's my great memory right now that comes to mind.
All right, so that's it from me, Joe Manganiello. I want to thank the amazing artists and storytellers and writers. Dungeons & Dragons was really a fountainhead of creativity for me as a kid. It is where I learned how to build a character, build a backstory, where I learned long-form storytelling as it pertains to writing and producing and directing, and really just sparked my lifelong love of telling stories. So thank you so much for your questions. I had a blast answering them, and I hope we get to do it again someday. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe, for being my guest today. I appreciate that. And quite honestly, he's a great mind for gaming, with all of his natural talents, and on top of that, his enthusiasm and his love. That makes him an excellent spokesperson. I can't think of a better person offhand. There are people I would want to play with more. Sometimes for nostalgia, like I think Robin Williams would have been a fantastic person to play with, but I'm sure he's got a great table. I'm sure he's a fantastic game master and a fantastic player. And having people like him championing the cause of D&D and championing the cause of gaming in general, I think brings in a lot of people and a lot of fresh faces to the game, which we really need. We need to grow the hobby. If it's just the same old people, it's eventually going to wither. He is great for D&D. I can't go on. I could go on and on about how much I respect his enthusiasm and everything like that. Even though I have differences of opinion on him on some things, a lot of that is a little bit broader, perhaps perspective on other games that exist besides D&D, and just what I've been through in my times. So there's no right answer or wrong answer, except for the 2-weapon fighting stuff. But that's Clark. That's just rules. But again, thank you for watching. Please, Wired and Wizards of the Coast, don't hack this. I'm transforming it by giving good criticism. So thank you very much. I do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time I'm in front of a camera with such a luminary, giving my little perspective about the fantastic hobby of gaming. Thanks, and farewell.